Ask the Podcast Coach for September 10th, 2022.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hi, it's Saturday morning. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is, do you have a Christmas sweater on already?
It looks like it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It's a little chilly here. It's from the Red Cross. It's when I give blood, they give away t-shirts.
That's the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. And if you are new to the show, you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/live, and that will jump you into the YouTube video where you can, or not into the video, that's where you can watch it live. And of course, if you want to jump in, then just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and you will find yourself. Now, we prefer you have clothes on for that, but askthepodcastcoach.com/join will jump you right into the video, and you can ask your questions live. But before we get to questions, since it is chilly there, we need to warm up Jim, so we're going to get him some coffee there. And that fun-filled coffee, I actually brought something today to share because I saw this on a Reddit, and because that coffee is brought to you by, where is the share screen? Here we go, share screen. We're going to look at bad artwork today because our sponsor is Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And I love this one. There's a picture of just a pair of sneakers. That's it. That's your album artwork. Not a good first impression. Somebody took a picture of what looks to be a paint by number of number 52 on the Baltimore Ravens, Ray Lewis. So there's just, this is not how you want to make your first impression. You want to go over to Mark, and he is going to sit down with you and really find out what your show's about, what your vibe is, and make sure that your artwork matches the whole brand of your show. And so you don't want to look like these guys. You want to go over again to podcastbranding.co. And this could be your artwork. It could be your website. It could be a league magnet. Anything that you want to look good, well, just go over to podcastbranding.co. Bonus, Mark's Canadian, and he's polite, and he's going to take care of you. He's an award-winning graphic artist. Check him out, podcastbranding.co.
Always so good on a chilly morning. All is on its way, although I think it'll be warm by the end of the week. Big thanks to our friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. He has a couple new episodes out. A Dolomite Is My Name is available out there. If you are looking for something new to listen to and something interesting, head out to based on a true story podcast.com. Dan, thanks for supporting the show.
Yeah, I watched the Elvis movie on HBO, and that was well done. I'll be interested to see how much of that again was true or whatever. And this is interesting. Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast coming back in September. Dave and Jim are stereo offset today. Dave is slightly right and Jim is slightly left.
That's probably our political leans too.
Well, what's interesting is that would be, as far as I know, I have not touched the pan in the Roadcaster. I did have a fun time with the Roadcaster this week. I think it was the Roadcaster, and that was either that or just my computer, but I mean everything locked up. And it was the case where you had to unplug it from the wall, like the on-off button wouldn't work. And I was like, I don't know what happened, but that was no fun. So if you have a question, though, if you're watching us live at askthepodcastcoach.com/live, feel free to throw that into the chat room. Again, you can join by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, or we do have a few people listening on the Wise app, and I forget what you have to do. Raise your hand, something of that nature to get my attention. I will bring you up on stage. It's a lot like Clubhouse in that case, so we can do that way. Kim is waiting in the wings, though. She's jumped in, askthepodcastcoach.com/join. So, Kim, what's your question? Welcome aboard.
Good morning, gentlemen. I came to you a couple weeks ago and said, so I've got to do this redirect thing, and you scared the crap out of me. Gentlemen,
Okay.
it was so simple
that
I couldn't believe it. I spent more time chatting with Mike Dell about changing my email address at Blueberry than I spent doing this process, which was a great investment of time as far as I was concerned. So
there you go.
Don't scare us so much. And there's this plugin called Redirection that makes it real simple.
Really easy. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key. And the reason we scare people though is if you had a typo, you lose your audience. So it's not that it's not hard. It's just you now totally get why I say whatever you do, don't multitask while you do that.
Yeah, but the whole process took me less than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's cut and paste. That way you can avoid the typos.
Bingo.
Right on.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad to hear.
Congrats on getting it done. We'd rather scare you and have you do it right than say, yeah, piece of cake. And then you call us back and are like, hey, that was way harder than you told us.
So it's a self-protective mechanism to keep me from coming in punching you in the face, right? Okay. Exactly. I got it now.
That'd be it. Awesome.
All right. Anything else, Kim?
Nope.
All right.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah, good to see you.
There we go.
You bet. Have a great Saturday.
And DR has won something called Podlottery. I believe the new name for that is Spotify. They give out hundreds of $1 million about every 6 weeks to somebody. I have never heard of that. I did find, which leads me to, I have notes over here. I keep finding new things that I'm like, wait, what is that? And this is one that I kind of go, let me share my screen here. The website, if you're listening to this in the car, it'll be in the show notes, is called Podfollow. And this is one of those kind of like link tree looking things, but it sounds cool. Share screen. Yes, I want to share screen. I don't know why this is such a struggle for me, but it's kind of cool. So if I go here and I'll type in Ask the Podcast. Come on, there we go. So if I click on this, it's going to ask me, honest. There we go. So I now get a link, but here's kind of what it does, which is, I know this is shocking, Jim. The answer to a podcast question almost always is?
It depends.
It depends, right? So here, the good news is I can give them this link. Now, I would not give out podfollow.com/767655864. I would say askthepodcastcoach.com/follow so that I still have my own brand in there. But what it's going to do is it's going to send people on an iOS device to Apple Podcasts, on an Android device to Google Podcasts, and on a desktop, they're going to send them to your website, which sounds all cool. And you can do things like I can share episodes because it looks at your feed in theory. So the whole thing is, and if you share it on social, it will make a pretty picture for it and things like that. So it sounds kind of cool. And I'm not sure what stats they get unless it's how many times people clicked on this. But to me, when I see, hey, I can send people to Apple Podcasts and they'll automatically go on an iPhone to, if I give them this one link and if they're on an iPhone, they go to Apple Podcasts, and I'm like, okay, I get that if your audience is really new to podcasting, but if you send that to me, I'm going to be like, oh, holy cow, hold on. What's your feed? I need to put this into Overcast because that's what I use. If you do that to Elsie Escobar, she's going to be like, hold on a second. What's your feed? I need to put this into Castro. So I get that Apple Podcast is the top dog in the whole app listening world and that whole 9 yards. But there's just a part of me that like, why don't you just do this on your website? And if you use my podcast reviews, which is what you'll see on the School of Podcasting, I've actually got a link there at the top that will do this exact same thing. So again, it reinforces my brand. If people link to it on my site, it boosts my SEO, that type of thing. So I just thought, I don't hate this idea. I'm just like, I would just do it on my own website and then have a link there to Google, Apple, Spotify, and Amazon, which again, still doesn't address the whole Overcast thing, which is in the top 10. But if you put all top 10 in the top 10, then you're your follow page becomes a giant mess. Even with Daniel's cool plugin, I wouldn't put that many options on my thing.
Do you get the feeling sometimes I think we've said this before, that we're solving problems that don't exist?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not everything that can be done always should be done. And listen, I don't want to poo-poo the idea if it's a good one on this. I don't particularly understand what they're trying to do here, but it does feel like, I mean, getting back to this Podlottery site, I just went out and checked it out. And really, it's just an app. It's iPhone only. That allows you to go out, you set up an account, you listen to, for shows you listen to, you get picks. And then when you submit these picks every day, and if your pick is a winner, then your podcast, they'll get a review for your podcast, right? And it sounds like a way of just getting people in an ecosystem where podcasts are getting listened to, and you get rewards for that. And then you get this lottery opportunity to get a review. The whole payoff on this thing is you get this review, and they say, we look at all the reviews that go in through the API to make sure they're actual real reviews, and some of those kinds of things. But the whole purpose is just to get reviews, right? And listen, again, nothing wrong with getting and asking for reviews,
right?
Social proof, some of those kinds of things. But
that's my question: are the reviews in the Podlottery app, or are they?
They go to, I think eventually they make their way through the API onto Apple. Yeah.
So you're going to get a lot of great show, love the host will be the
probably.
review.
Yeah. I wouldn't, well, okay. Not to be cynical, but I will for just a second. It's a great play for an advertising on the app. So I create this app where I create a need for people to be on it all the time. So yeah, Dave, you and I use Overcast, or you might use Pocket Casts. I forget what you use.
I use Overcast, and then I've been playing with Podhive or Podverse.
So Marco does a great job of attracting people. That's his name, right? To Overcast, and there's advertisements on there, and that kind of works, right? Well, Podlottery, I mean, once you figured out the API bit of it, of getting reviews in there, then their job is just to get as many people on the app as possible. And just saying, come to my app because it's great now doesn't work, because there's a ton of great apps. So you got to create this draw of the potential, those are in air quotes if you're listening to the audio only, the potential to win the lottery and get these, they may be good, you never know, but these reviews. So I bet this is more of an advertising play for the app than it is a review play for podcasters. So there you go. DR, that would be my overview of Podlottery.
And Daniel says there is no such API to push reviews in Apple Podcast.
That's what they say in their FAQ.
I forget there's another one that I was kind of bummed about, because it was like, here's, your show is listed in our directory. Click here to claim your show. And I was like, all right, let's see what this is. And you log in, and it's a media host. And it's like, click here to, it was really like, it was like one step above Acast, because Acast doesn't pretend they're trying to get you as a media host. They're very blatant about it. Leave your media host and join us. And this was like, oh, it sounds like another directory. You click on it, and it was like, here, click here, and we will transfer your show. Like, here's your RSS feed. We already know it because that's how we got your email address, and we'll transfer it into whatever it was. And I was just like, wow, it's just aggressive and slightly, if you want to get on my dark side, just lie to me. Just lie, because you don't have to. You really don't have to. You can say anything negative about me. I would rather have negative feedback than honest or something that sounds positive, but it's a lie. I'm like, just tell me the truth. So
Daniel in chat says, and this is probably a little nerdier than it needs to be, but all they say through access to Apple's API, the Podlottery system automatically conducts regular audits of each review. So they're auditing so it sounds like you leave the reviews through Apple, and then they're scraping the reviews to make sure they're getting however they're doing that, guys. So it's neither here nor there. You're leaving a review, they say they're checking it, and it sounds like a little bit of a.
You know what it reminds me of?
Keep you on.
we're going to dust off a lot of cobwebs on this, and a lot of people are going to, but Jim, you'll remember, do you remember web rings?
Oh yeah.
Web rings, you'd put some code on your website and you'd have this thing at the bottom to be like, this show is part of, we should bring this, is Pod Ring available somewhere? It's like, where it would be like, this is part of the such and such. I think mine was for musicians, and it would have a link and you could just say next and would take you to the next website. And then next, and you could just go through this little, everybody had the code at the bottom of their page and you could just go to a next. So it was like a little network kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
support the ring, right? Was what they, support the ring. Listen, this may be a great idea. I'm just saying the pod lottery concept is really designed to get people to stay on the app.
Yeah.
And the reviews are the benefit, or a side benefit of it, as opposed to it really, it's listen, a great idea to get people to engage in your app. You have to go through the app to get these picks, and that keeps you in the app. And then if you can start serving advertising through the app, you're in pretty good shape. It's a nice no cost option to get people to come over to your app.
And it's available only on the iPhone. I see.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense because they're doing the whole, review thing.
Work on Android. It's probably coming. The
Coming soon.
iPhone 1 is, I've seen a lot of developers do this. They'll start on the iOS platform to start with, and then move over to Android from there.
Yeah. Steven asked, does Podpage support working as a URL shortener? It sure does. Hence, askthepodcastcoach.com/join, askthepodcastcoach.com/live. And if you'd like to learn Podpage, go over to learnpodpage.com. That's my affiliate link, and you can see how that is. It's under websites. They call them pretty redirects. So they're not calling them pretty links. It's pretty redirects. But I use them every Saturday. That's one of the
stats for you too. Do they keep stats on Podpage for those links?
What they do? No, they don't. I wish they did. That would be cool, because that's why I use Rebrandly, because it does things. Rebrandly is a cool. It's kind of like Bitly, but I use Rebrandly, and that's another one. If I wanted to, I could make my own link and say, if somebody's on an iPhone, send them to this link. If they're on an Android, send them to that link. So it's a pretty cool service that I use. And the only reason I used it was at the time, if you made a Bitly link and then later, like let's say it's an affiliate link, and all of a sudden the company that you were referring people to goes out of business or they don't carry the product anymore, there was no way to go in and change the source link that you were sending people to. So you couldn't update your affiliate link. And so then I found Rebrandly, who was basically at a page that said, hey, tired of not being able to change links in Bitly? We let you do that. And so I signed up for them, and then literally like 2 months later, Bitly changed their policy, and you can now change that. But I've been with them for a while, so that's the way it works. Ken is saying, my app was a bust. My ego fulfillment and effective use of my... Oh, wow. I should have read this before I put this on the screen. What is he saying? What is he saying? When you say your app, my ego fulfillment. So the cool news is what he's saying is, look, I got an app, but it didn't work. I think that depends on who your audience is, right? I mean, I know Glenn had great success with the Horse Radio Network. Awesome supporter, Glenn Hebert, and said, he said, because horse people didn't understand, they had to download Apple Podcasts or whatever. He goes, but they understood how to download an app. And so I will probably say I get 4, if that, a month. I have an app for the School of Podcasting through Libsyn, and I do not promote it at all. It's just called Podcasting Tips. And when you download it, you get the School of Podcasting. And, so I don't promote it, and still 4 people are downloading it because they found it in the App Store. It was like, oh, what is this? And so they downloaded it. And
I did the app through Spreaker for a while. The iPhone, $99. I think it was $100 a year for each app, iPhone and Android, and I got some usage out of it. Eventually, the numbers just kind of faded off as more people moved. At least my listeners moved to other apps, whatever. And when I killed them, I got no feedback. Nobody's like, hey, where's the app? So I was like, okay, good call. I was ready to bring it back, Dave, if something, turn it back on, if a bunch of people were like, hey, wait, but I killed it. I got no feedback, saved me $200 a year, and it was a good, good option. Depending upon what you're doing, an app might be very applicable. Might be a good choice. So,
and in the process of, it's interesting because I'll be in a Facebook group or Reddit or something leads to that, which leads to this, which leads to that. I found the guy from Pod Inbox, and it's killing me because I can't remember what his is. Something like the Podcast Growth Show or Grow Your Podcast Show or Grow Show, something. Anyway, he was interviewing a person I know whose name is escaping, Sonny Galt. And Sonny, he said, is the founder of the Podcast Network Alliance. And I was like, Podcast Network Alliance? Because that sounds a little bit like the kind of Podcast Academy kind of thing, or not yeah. Is that the name of the, yeah. And so I looked it up and I thought, because I know there are some people that have, we have our awesome supporter. He has the whole history of sports network. Arnie, the football dude, has a network. And so it turns out there's the Podcast Network Alliance, and it's a whole thing where it sounds like a bunch of network people with networks get together. So I looked at it, and of course the first person, well, that's their, wait a minute, somewhere down, here we go. They're members. And of course there's Glenn right there in the upper right-hand corner. I have not heard of many of these. Soundadvice.fm, the Bar Podcast Network Asia, kind of cool. But I know there's like an Asian, kind of network. There's the, like People of Color network. I've seen that. And I was like, oh, I bet people don't know this exists. And so if you're running a network, it doesn't look like and there's Sunny. She's the person I know. She also works for Zencaster. And so these are the people behind it. And I was like, I did not know. But when I click on join, I don't think that, at least from what I saw, I don't see where it costs anything. So at the bottom where it says, how did you hear about us? Put Dave Jackson, put Ask the Podcast Coach, Jim Cullison. But I was just like, didn't know this. So there's a lot of that I think that goes on where I'm constantly running into stuff. Like I'm always hearing about podcast events that I would have gladly promoted, except like I'm not, like we talk about Felix and the Latin Podcast Awards because I know about them. But I don't know if they just think, well, he's not a person of color, or he's not a female, or he's not whatever. And I was like, okay, but I would gladly, because there are people of all shapes and sizes that listen to all my shows. I'm like, I'd be happy to promote them. So if you have something going on, let me know. So have you run anything that you kind of go, I didn't know that exists? Or?
Well, there's always a challenge in in knowing everything.
Yeah.
There's so many things going on in the challenges. And, even when we create networking apps or ways to stay networked or whatever, then we get a whole bunch of those. And then it's like, okay, which one of those do I, I'm in Discord for a bunch of crypto stuff, and I follow a whole bunch of different crypto groups. And I've so many I can't keep up. So you start then eliminating the ones you're not a part of because you're like, and then things go on in those and you don't know. So it's certainly a challenge. I think we're in that, we're in that phase in podcasting right now where it's popular enough. There's probably more services, more offerings, just like this Podlottery we were talking about, that are popping up that we can keep track of, So the goal they're trying to solve is trying to bring podcasters together and get them reviews, and then create a community around it. So, but there's a couple apps like that are out there. Which ones do I do?
Yeah, and as you, who just put this in the chat room? You did. You said, they are, Podlottery is brought to you by Podmatch and Podcast SOP. So when I saw that one, I was like, wait a minute, Podcast SOP, that might be a little stepping on my toes here.
Oh, there you go. You've never heard of them before?
I actually have, because I know the guy who runs it, which is this guy. It's really nice. He runs Podmatch. And I forget his name. I should know it. But as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, it's the Podmatch guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And SOP is standard operating procedure, not
Right. That's cool podcasting.
But this looks like keep track of upcoming episodes. This is like podcast, the thing I'm using over here, Podcast Studio Pro, where I can put in my ideas and drag them into episodes. It sounds like it, at least.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, you can see the next thing I was like, oh, we could talk about this. Jennifer in a Facebook group somewhere said, a word of caution as you, where to spend your advertising dollars. That's actually my question of the month, kind of, is I'm asking, a lot of people are promoting their shows on other shows. And my question is, have you ever actually gone to listen to a show after hearing their promo on another show? Because we're all spending money. My question is, okay, yeah, but is it working? And in the case of Jennifer, she says, I'm new to Podbean and I just launched a new podcast using their hosting service. It's a paranormal podcast and I paid $200 to place a trailer for it in front of targeted categories that would fit my audience. Well, Podbean placed my trailer in front of a sex podcast, which is a whole new kind of paranormal in that way. Maybe you're having sex with ghosts or something. I don't know. That's a weird one. Okay, I'm flexible enough that if it was a sex advice podcast or something, whatever. But this was an ASMR, which I only know, every time I see that, I don't know exactly what it stands for, but I just know it's something like mouth noises, like that kind of thing. Basically audio porn. Nothing against sex, but this is not my target audience. Would you pay $200 for this? And they're telling me they can't give me a refund. Where it is placed is out of their control. That's not a good thing you want to hear. When you're talking about ad placement, you don't want to hear, oh, round and round and round it goes. That would be bad. So that's, I know Buzzsprout, I've been listening to the Buzzcast, and they now, because when I tried my audio advertisement with the Buzzcast thing, it used whatever categories were in your feed. So like you're going in my case, it was technology and I think business. And now they have, in the same way that the podcaster can say yes or no to having your spot on their show, you get to say yes or no if they can run your spot on their show. Because I don't want my, podcasting show run on a sports podcast. That doesn't make any sense. So it's going to be tricky to see how this all, lines up and things like that. So
listen, getting that categorization of it right is, I think it's a harder problem than we think. And it just takes a little bit of work. I understand the no refund policy because those ads have been served and have been heard by people. The miscategorization of it, I guess I'd want to know, in a lot of these advertising, you can check off turn on whatever you want or don't want. Right. And I'm kind of wondering, I've never been through Podbean's advertising thing. If it was checked that I didn't want it and it was served, I should probably get my money back, right? I mean, that's the service. If the option isn't there, and I guess this is a warning to podcasters, if you're buying advertising on a site that doesn't give you some granularity of where they're being delivered, then it's the lottery. Then it's, and you may not want to advertise there if you don't have some kind of control. I know Spreaker's got a whole list of categories that say, hey, this and that and that. I can't have my business podcast. I could never have a business podcast show up on one of those, in one of those.
Yeah,
I'd be fired. Right. So caveat emptor, right? I think if you're buying advertising, make sure you get the granularity to select where it goes. Then make sure there's some kind of resolution. Like, hey, if it's misserved, what are you going to do about that? So right. I think sometimes we go into these advertising relationships, and just, oh yeah, okay, go check, we're off. And they probably do. You probably do need to check the terms of service just to make sure.
Yeah, that's there was that whole thing where Spotify had a problem with that, and they had alcohol ads on shows about sobriety. And they're like, yeah, that's not good. Yeah. So you have to be careful with that.
Well, I mean, imagine in the political climate we're in today and how that could go wrong, how ads for certain sides of things could go wrong on certain podcasts. So
yeah,
just be, I guess the word to the wise is just be really, really careful and make sure this may be an area where you actually want to read the terms of service. I know nobody does that, but that may be something you want to understand before you go off and do that.
And remember too, that if you are doing ads, I'm experimenting now with advertising in Pod News, and realize that there is the advertisement that makes people click. So that's part one. And then the other thing is where you're sending them to. Like if you go, well, 10 people clicked on it, but nobody ordered anything. Well, okay. So you got people to click. So maybe that ad is okay. That's appearing in the newsletter. Maybe need to work on your landing page. And then there are other times if you go, nobody even clicked on it. All right. Well, what were the words that you put into the newsletter? That's a whole ball of wax. So you have to really kind of think through and think about it. But Gary says, in terms of, I was asking, we're all running ads. Is anybody actually finding new shows through this? And Gary says, yeah. He says, I've gone to podcasts after hearing ads for shows on other shows. Well, that's an example of why people are doing this. If you get your promo in front of the right audience and you've written a good, some sort of ad to get people to click, well, people like Gary will click. So Gary, you need to go to schoolofpodcasting.com/question and upload that answer. And of course, be sure to mention your show and your website. I did learn a lesson. This week's episode on the School of Podcasting is going to be, here are like probably 5 or 6 things I've done recently that didn't work. And one was, I started I asked my audience, like, what is your question? What would you ask for the question of the month if this was your show? And somebody sent in a question that, looking back at it, I really appreciate that they sent in the question, but I should have reworded it, but I wanted to use their voice, and they just didn't voice the question very well, to where it was the first one I had one reply, and I was like, ooh, that kind of tanked. And I had somebody give me feedback that said, it wasn't really the most clearly worded question. I think people were confused. And the other thing I did is I changed my page to go right to, Rumble Studio. So people could just click and record. Well, my audience, filled with podcasters, often used the button that said click here to upload, and it would upload it to a Dropbox or media file folder. So it was just one of those, like, anytime you play with something, it could go better or it could go worse. So, you never know, but you try stuff and it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And I still don't know what ASMR stands for, but DR said, a guest on my Boomer Side Hustle Lounge was the ASMR grandpa, 48,000 followers on YouTube. It felt like the longest interview of my life. He talked very slow. So, yeah. If you are looking for the whole podcast movement, Ben Shapiro talk, I'm not going to do that live. And the reason for that is it's a lightning rod. People are very, very passionate about it. If you want to hear me talk about it, go to the end of the School of Podcasting. There will be not this week, which is one of the things that I've learned, is sometimes you need to do a little more research than you thought you did. And, but I will be redoing that. But I did that. People said they really appreciated the fact that I admitted this is not about podcasting. It's not about growing your audience. And I put it at the very end. And then I put a disclaimer. I'm like, look, if talking about, in the past, old Dave would say gender. New Dave says identities. So these are the things I'm learning, but this is just not the place for it. So I appreciate that. And that's, we had the same stance, last week as well. Just not something that, it just riles people up for whatever.
And let's be clear. I asked not to. Like, I would just let's not do this.
Do that.
So a little bit of it was just me asking not to do it as well.
The other thing I realized last week when I was listening to the episode is I asked this question, and then in true Dave Jackson fashion, took a tangent. And I was like, we never answered this question. That is, what are the 3 biggest things that will make you choose not to listen to a podcast? Somebody in a Facebook group said they were researching this for a client, and I asked this and then started talking, and we never actually answered the question. So Jim, what are the things that make you tune out?
Things that make me tune out of a podcast when I'm listening? Is that the... Yeah,
it's kind of speaking of weird, maybe not the best worded question. Yeah, what are the 3 biggest things that will make you choose not to listen to a podcast?
Oh, really bad audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's easy. Number one, if I feel embarrassed for the host in the first 30 seconds, now I haven't heard one of those in a long time. So I think we've gotten better overall, but somebody who comes on and they're uncomfortable, I don't, that makes me uncomfortable when those kinds of things happen. So those are two big ones for me. Or someone just starts screaming into the microphone from the very beginning. Now I do like when you start this show, when you say the word live, you put a whole bunch of emphasis, live. I can't do it. You get that rock and roll David Lee Roth thing going on when you do that. Not every week, but you do. I like that. But someone screaming into the mic, yeah, that's not for me. That's
sports guys. What is it with sports that we have to say, taking the iron this week, the Browns will be trying to, like, okay.
I know.
We had a guy on our local news, the sports guy, would just, we're going to send it over to so-and-so. All right, well, this week at the Diamond. And you're like, okay, you have a microphone in front of you. You don't need to scream.
Sometimes I wonder, we do this with headphones on. If we're not getting enough audio back into our headphones and we're talking, our volume goes up. Our tone goes up a little bit too, because you're pushing. Yeah. You don't know what you sound like, so you're pushing your audio hard. I wonder, not in all cases, but I wonder how many podcasters are recording and not truly hearing their full fidelity back into their ears, so they understand what they're going out, what their audio is like going out. Then it's even more scary when you think how many don't know they're actually doing that. Like how many don't know. Like, let me give you an example. So if you have this mic and it's plugged in via USB and you're listening on the output of it through the microphone jack on the back, you are not getting full fidelity. It's kind of this muffled, you can kind of hear yourself, but you can't. I mean, it's not very good. I see a lot of people do that. Do they know they're not getting, do they think that's great sound? And they're like, no, that's not really what you sound like going out to the internet. So I wonder sometimes if people just don't quite get all the way there with equipment and they don't know they're shouting into their microphone. And listen, I don't hear a lot of those anymore.
Right.
So it's not, we asked the question, what would make me not if I hit play and they were like, crazy on the mic? Maybe like, okay, what's the next one?
Yeah. Well, that, and now, the whole 30 seconds at Apple, it's like they have that big listen button. And if the first thing is a really long ad, unless your name's Joe Rogan, I'm not going to sit through that. That's one of the things I love about Overcast. I have Overcast start Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend at the 7-minute mark, because I want to hear him do his chit chat with his, hey, I'm going to make fun of all my staff and make them feel like crap. Which sometimes I get it, but I don't get it. But I like Conan O'Brien, but his beginning is just, I never go, man, that was a great 7 minutes of audio. I'm just like, I really just tuned in to hear him talk to, whatever, James Taylor or Billie Eilish or whoever. Kyle says, up, down, down, up, volume. Yeah, that is a podcast death sentence. If you make me adjust the volume, especially with an interview where you're really quiet, and then the guest comes on, you're like, yeah, that's not going to work. And then, Dan asks, is the question to stop listening to an episode or stop listening to a show? I'm subscribed for a long time. Yeah, that's true. What's going to make you unsubscribe? I think we've talked about this. People tune in and out of your show, on in some cases, regular basis. They get tired of, when you've listened to 3 AC/DC albums in a row, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm ready for something different, and then you come over and you listen to whatever. And then you're like, I could use a little AC/DC right now, because you know what you're going to get. And I think it's the same way with I haven't listened to Radiolab in a long time, because they used to do, it's kind of weird, but they got into really kind of weird sciencey stuff. Like, I remember once they did one on football that was around the Super Bowl, and it was really cool. And like things that I could, but then they got into like the mating habits of some blue starfish thing that I was like,
that's
okay,
a good episode. I like that one.
It was interesting, but it
blue-blooded that helps with vaccines and stuff. That was that one. But Dave, I I'm also a big Radiolab fan, but they have been doing a lot of repeats. So they come in and are like, hey, we thought this episode that we did 4 years ago would be good today. And that's okay. But they're doing it a lot. And I'm like, where's the new content in this? And I just don't feel like, I think there's been a change. Chad and Robert Krolich are now gone, and Robert retired and Chad's moved on to something else. And those were the creators of the show. And this may be, we think about podcasting or selling your podcast or have somebody else taking over your podcast. They have 2 new hosts and they're great. Lulu's great. I mean, they do a great job. But it's different. It's different.
Well, that brings up Heather from, I want to say Osgood, but that doesn't sound, it is Heather Osgood and I'm not sure what the website is. I know it's Podbroker, and it's where I've done a show for, I don't know, 405 episodes, and you're ready to move on. Instead of just letting the show die, you basically go over there, fill out a form, and they kind of try to assess what it's worth, and then you sell it. But that's the question is, like, okay, Jim and I decide we're done. We're going to tap out, and we go over to ask the podcast coach, and we go to sell it to somebody else. It's weird. It's like when you were saying with Radiolab, they're fine hosts, but that relationship you had with the other people, it kind of has to transfer.
Yeah.
And to transfer, they have to do something to earn your trust, I guess, in a way. And that might be a bigger jump than you think it is. It hasn't worked very well in music. The Motley Crue thing, although there is the Van Halen. Van Halen's the exception.
Journey did it for a while.
Yeah, maybe and not. Actually here's the thing. That guy has been in the band longer than Steve Perry has now. But in terms of radio success,
for sure.
But
they're playing all. Listen, they go to concerts. There's no new stuff that people are going, new Journey. They're going, play the old stuff, right? That's there. So it's probably a bad example. But yeah, I mean, changing hosts is hard, and sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. I don't think there's a recipe for it either. I don't like why. Let's just go back to the music for a second. Why did Van Halen work? We don't know for the most part. I mean, Sammy Hagar could have come in and those could have not been accepted for what they were. I mean, the audience, the previous Van Halen audience had to be okay with not having David Lee Roth at that point. There's a lot of podcasts. If we use Radiolab now as an example, where, Robert and Chad had done it for such a long time together and had such a chemistry together. And then Robert retired and Chad went somewhere else, and Lulu and Loftif have come in and filled that void. I think it's going to take some time, right? And are they willing to, and this may be why we're hearing back episodes, is to give them some time to produce some more content with them together. So it's you got to work hard at it. And it would be interesting to look at their numbers of Radiolab and say, how have you guys done during the transition, and what's been the struggle, and are you seeing a drop off on listeners? It'd be. I don't think they tell us.
Yeah,
but it'd be interesting to know.
we're losing people, and pallets of listeners every week. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they're not.
Yeah. Well, probably what's going to happen is they'll lose some listeners because they're like, oh, I want Chad back, and then new people will find it and they'll tell their friends, and it'll end up going up just as high, if not higher. Dan says about Heather, she's from True Native Media, thank you, which is his ad agency. The podcast broker, she teamed up with some cool people, Gordon Firemark. So I think he's now trademarked the podcast lawyer. I think he's now officially, that's his
James
thing.
Cridlin everywhere? Like
he is.
It's the most recognizable name in podcasting, James Cridlin.
He is. He's I just, if you listen to, I listen to his newsletter, which I should read it more. And and all he's really doing is give me a little bit of the story and hoping I will go subscribe to the newsletter, which I did, and then read the full story there. But this week he was in Malaysia, and I forget where he was on Friday, but it was someplace that wasn't Australia, which is where he's from. And it was like, holy, so yeah, that guy, I remember somebody saying, I forget what I was talking to, and they said, well, you could replace pod news. And I was like, I don't think so. You know, I mean, granted, you know, we existed before James Cridlin. We could exist after, but I'm like, that guy is everywhere and brings a total global thing. There's a podcast I just found, and it's kind of interesting when we talk about, hey, should I start a podcast? You know, some people think it's oversaturated and this and that, or somebody else is doing it. So you have James who brings his Cridliness to the microphone, and he's got his ever so slight. Every now and then he will just have a hint of snark. I love that. There's a new one called Podcasting by the Numbers, and it's interesting because this guy so obviously comes from a radio background. I mean, the only thing that's missing is like typewriters in the background. I mean, it is old school radio. Like I expect it to be like bah, 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 da, 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 and here is the news from the podcast agency. All right, it's just like holy cow. And but I've also learned that numbers, because it's all about numbers. 58% of podcasters like sugar on their Wheaties or whatever. It's kind of interesting. And I just realized we have a guest waiting on Wisdom. So I always love this because it gives me a countdown, but it's I'm going to butcher abundant life hacker manifesting through the ancient law of attraction, learning and teaching to be it's John Busy, I believe is how I pronounce this, but I'm going to bring him up on stage. I'm going to slide up the fader and say in 1 second, there he is. Welcome to the show. What's your question? How can we help? The guest has left the talk. So he raised his, it was so close, and wait, now the guest is waiting again. Oh, this could be, and he's
Remember,
coming.
We're looking for a question is what we're
yeah.
a podcasting question.
Yeah. So 3, 2, 1, there we go. And guest is awaiting.
Hello.
There we go. Hey, how are you? And then we dropped him again. So it's this is exciting audio.
Yeah, it must just be a bandwidth problem, I'm sure.
Could be. Yeah, because it sounded like he was out and about. So,
Yep.
Yeah, when you get home or near Wi-Fi or something, give us a call back. But the joys of live, it's always fun. And then see now, DR said, I love the number show. It's very short, stats. I just love it because, and I don't mean this in a negative way, right? We all come from, this guy comes from radio because it just sounds like, it just sounds like old radio. Like not so much like 1940s, like, oh, humdinger of a time, not that kind of thing, but just very,
I wish we did more of that style of that is kind of yelling into I don't know how long I could take a 40s radio broadcast.
Welcome to Ask the Podcast Coach today. Yeah. We'd have to come up with all those. We're going to try one more time here.
It's a humdinger.
Yeah. We'll see if his bandwidth is improved.
John, is that his name?
This is John. Yeah. John. Yeah. And it looks, he's connected.
John,
there he is.
Can you hear us?
Oh, now you can hear me.
There we go. And what's your question? How can we help?
This app gets janky sometimes.
It does.
I talked to you, Dave. I talked to you a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. What's your question?
John Busy. First, I don't have a question. I have a couple questions actually. I have just two, but I wanted to say thanks for the advice because you told me to get the Zoom podcast P4. I got that.
Nice.
And it's very good. I've been using it. I'm driving right now. I'm obviously not on that right now, or because I have a big diaphragm microphone. It would sound a lot better.
That's all right.
But I'm driving. I'm on my Bluetooth headset, so I probably sound titty. But Thanks for the advice. That was great. That's a really good piece of equipment. It's very portable, and I've been able to carry it around with me.
Nice.
And I use the Bluetooth feature, so I can have people on my phone and I can stream live and all that. So very good. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, appreciate that. The question I had is it says on your thing in the Podcast Hall of Fame.
I'm in the Podcast Hall of Fame. Yes, that is true.
Yeah. Can you speak on that a little bit? How you got there and all that?
I started in 2005. I am dedicated to helping people plan, launch, grow, and monetize their podcast. I did it long enough to apparently people listen to me. And a group of my peers, when asked who should we induct into the Hall of Fame this year, said, "Oh, we got to get Dave Jackson in." And
nice.
I mean, that's how it happened. I didn't have to apply. I didn't ask. It was just one day Gary Leland called me up and said, "We're inducting you into the Podcasters Hall of Fame. And I was like, it's one of the few times I've been speechless. I was like, are you sure you got the right guy?
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that even working?
Nice.
Is that process still in place, Dave?
It's still in place. We inducted Evo and Emily Morse and a bunch of other people last year. It's for whatever reasons, the ceremony is at Podcast Movement Evolutions. I wish they would bring it to Podcast Movement instead. But yeah, it's still around and still happening. But that's what it is. I think if you go to Podcasters, I think with an S, Hall of Fame, that'll take you to a page that explains more about it. And it also
Gotcha.
it also explains the criteria. I think you have to be podcasting longer than 10 years, and I forget what the criteria is, but there's some sort of criteria.
Gotcha. So it's like is it by like Apple, or is it just like an independent organization? Somebody figured we have to start this because there's so many podcasters out there.
Yeah, it was started about I want to say 2015-ish, and it was just something where we wanted to recognize some of the pioneers: Adam Curry, Rob Walsh, Todd Cochran, Rob Greenlee were some of the first people, and the Danny Pena was another guy that's just been crushing it since, some of these guys were podcasting before they were podcasting. Like Danny used to go down and record on cassettes and stuff. It was crazy. So
nice. Well, just two more questions. You're like a podcast expert. You obviously helped me as soon as I talked to you. Do you have like a course, or do you just, like, if I want to learn more about how to improve mine or spread the word or whatever, do you have a course, or would you just suggest listening to your episodes? It's
funny you should ask. I run a website called schoolofpodcasting.com. I've been doing that since 2005. If you want consulting, I can do that as well. I have resources like the podcast review show that I do with a guy from radio, where we actually review your show and your website, because some people just like, hey, I need some feedback. I've got that. I've got the podcast rodeo show, which is just me basically doing that same thing. So, but for me, the best money, if you use the coupon code ASK, go to schoolofpodcasting.com, sign up with the coupon code ASK, and that comes with basically unlimited time-shifted consulting. So you and I use an app, and you ask me a question and I give you an answer, and it's basically Ask the Podcast Coach 24/7. Plus there's group coaching, plus there's step-by-step tutorials. It's all there at schoolofpodcasting.com. So
gotcha. I'm writing it down as I'm talking to you.
Okay.
So schoolofpodcasting.com.
Yeah, please don't write.
Driving, John.
Yeah.
You were driving.
Please drive. No, I won't.
Okay.
I won't. But I can't exactly voice text while I'm talking to you. So I had to do that. Okay. My last question, in your opinion, because you're like podcasting guru, what do you think makes Joe Rogan such a popular person? Now he was already famous. That's the one thing, sure. But anybody, famous can do something and then they'll get a big audience. But if they're not worth listening to, then that it's pretty much known relatively quickly that that the platform isn't for them. Right. I.e., the Obamas had a podcast that I think it tanked. So
right.
So, what do you think makes him so popular?
Well, number one, and you kind of glossed over it, Joe Rogan was popular. Yes, he was. Joe Rogan started his career in 1989. 1989. Right. So it took him like 9 years before he had his first album. He was on 2 network shows. There was Fear Factor and other things like that. So let's not gloss over the fact that he had millions of people who knew who he was. And at the time, doing a really long interview show was, people were doing interview shows. Nobody was doing 3-hour interview shows. And for the record, I think Joe should edit. My favorite Joe Rogan is when Joe has his assistant pull up YouTube, and you watch, you listen to Joe go, oh, look at that. Did you see that? Oh, I'm like, that's great audio, Joe. And he's not afraid to be Joe Rogan. I mean, he's had people with pitchforks and torches, demanding that he gets fired because he said something. And, he just says it. And if you like him, you like him. If you don't, you don't. And I don't know, Jim, why do you think Joe Rogan is popular?
Well, like you mentioned, he was popular before, so he carried that in I mean, he carried that audience in, and then for whatever reason, like I think the kids like it, like all my kids like it, because it's just raw radio. Like it's just he doesn't pull punches, he doesn't hold back. And they kind of like the truth in that. They like the long form, even though we say it should be shorter. They like the long form of it, and he's just striking a chord with people. Listen, you could have 10 or 100 other people try to start a podcast and do exactly what he's doing and not be successful because they're not him. Like he's being him, which I think is what's important. He's being authentic.
And you made a good point. I think some of it is like if Jim and I just talked here and just was like, hey, what's up in your family and what'd you do? Oh, I remember this time in high school. That would be kind of boring because, well, we're not celebrity and we don't care. Right. Nobody cares what I did in high school. Nobody cares about my backstory because I'm not super famous. He's talking to super famous people. And the other thing, and I don't know this, it's just a thought. I think Joe picks his own guests because he has people that I've never heard of come on the show. He has the old MMA thing too. That's a whole other thing. But like when he talks to, it's either comedians or big celebrities or people that are like, he had Ted Nugent on, and Ted Nugent's another lightning rod. You either love that guy or you hate him. But it was interesting because you found out that Ted Nugent's son is a vegan. And I was like, that's got to be fun at Thanksgiving. So, but I hate when I hear people go, well, I want to be just like Joe Rogan. I'm like, here's the thing. That's not going to work because being Joe Rogan comes very natural to Joe Rogan because, well, he's Joe Rogan. Be you, find out who your audience is, what do they want, and give it to them. Do it on a regular basis and always bring value, and then promote.
That's my next question.
All right.
And I'm about the timeout on wisdom. It goes out in like a minute and
12
seconds.
All right.
Yeah. Well, I'll say quickly. Best methods of promotion you recommend, and I'm trying. It was a double question. Well, the best methods of promotion, and what do you find to be the best formats for? I mean, I know that's a difficult one probably, but the best formats for, I guess gaining bigger followings and so on.
Okay, so in terms of format, well, first, how do I grow my show? Number one, who is your audience? What do they want, and give it to them. There's no sense promoting a show that doesn't connect with your audience. So go get somebody to listen to your show and fix the things that need fixed and do more to the things that are working. Then, since you know who your audience is, go to where they are and make friends with them. Do not skip step 3. Make friends with them and then tell them about your show. Because if you skip step 3, you figure out who your audience is, you go to where they are and they tell them about your show. That's called spam. So you have to make friends with people and do that. And in terms of format, when you can see the eye color of your audience, that's the best. Hands down, meeting people in person. So in last month, I spent a couple weekends going to downtown Akron because I do a show about downtown Akron and just handed out business cards and just talked to people. And that really, really, really took me way out of my comfort zone. That was not something I enjoyed doing. Once I started doing it, it was okay. But in terms of format, I guess, appear on other shows. Don't look at being a guest on other shows as I'm just going to go talk to people. It's a matter of who do I want to partner with in some cases, because that's really one of the benefits. Jim, when it comes to, growing, your business shows, what are you guys doing? I mean, obviously there's social and we do a lot through our own marketing, right? I think the key on this is, I threw some things in chat to talk about this. What we come at this always from a tool perspective first, instead of doing the market research to say, where is, and you mentioned this, Dave, where's my audience and what's the most effective way to reach my audience? Then you plug in the tools for the advertising. So, we get pitched hey, come and do ad insertion into your podcast. And you do that. This goes call back to the very first discussion we had. Then so you do that. But was ad insertion the right way to reach your audience, right? Well, maybe you need to build a newsletter and work it that way. Or maybe you need to do all those things. But do the market like you would for any small business or any business.
do the market research.
Yeah.
Figure out, okay, where is my audience? Where are they? What are they doing? What's the most effective way to reach them? And then do those things that reach them most effectively. We find we have about 5 channels that we work all the time, and sometimes they don't all work. You have to stay. Kyle says this in chat. You have to stay consistent with advertising. Advertising is never one and done. It's never. You never just do it one time and then you're done. You have to repeat it over and over and over and over again. And it's why call to actions inside your podcast, you need to have similar or same ones all the time. It takes a long time for people to act on those. They need to hear them over and over and over. You're sick of them. They're not. So, just remember consistency is important.
Yeah. And then Dan brought up a point about Joe Rogan. He says, I think a big part of that is starting in the 1980s through comedy, he learned how to entertain. And I think that cannot be, he's entertaining. Yeah, no, right. And he says, so they knew who he was, and he knew how to entertain an audience. And again, if we go back to the laugh, cry, think, grow, educate, or entertain, he's making us laugh in some cases. He definitely brings up stories that you go, wait, the what? He's like, oh, don't you remember back in like 1948 and the government was sticking mules with a thing, and you're like, the what? The who? What? And then they bring up the source and you're like, holy cow, that's true. So there is, I don't listen. I've only listened about probably 4 episodes of Joe Rogan. One was Ted Nugent. One was Bernie Sanders. The Bernie Sanders interview was amazing because here again was a politician, and he said that Bernie Sanders goes, look, the presidential debates are worthless. So that's amazing to hear from a guy that's running for president. And he's like, because all you're trying to do is who's going to have the best soundbite. He goes, they're not going to play the whole thing. They're just going to play sound bites. And he goes, so you got to come up with your best sound bite. And it was just amazing. And I actually was like, had he not dropped out, I might have voted for Bernie Sanders, because there was some stuff he was saying that I was like, okay, he definitely thought outside the box. And there were some things I was like, I don't know if I'm down with that, Bernie. But I was like, that conversation let me get to know him. And maybe that's another thing about, Joe. I listen to Podcast Junkies because Harry Duran is interviewing people that I often know because they're in the podcast space. But like Harry Duran is where I learned that Ray Ortega used to be a cop. And I was like, what? And like, yeah, Ray Ortega used to be a cop. And so I knew he was a produce guy, but I did not know he had law enforcement in his background. So that's those things. And it's the other thing I guess I would add is it takes years, unless you got a big budget, to grow an audience. If you're trying to do this organically, and nobody wants to hear that. And it seems that way that, I give you an example. I have a friend of mine, and we were talking about church, and we were talking about how we're trying to grow ours and this and that. And I go, let me ask you an honest question. I'm a podcaster, but I'm not recording this. I go, would you tell a friend to come to your church? And he's like, oh no, it's awful. And I go, well, there's part of the problem right there. And so one of the questions, I have a member of the School of Podcasting right now, and I'm going to go back and listen to a few of his episodes. But he said, I really want to focus on growing this when I get back. And one of my questions is, we should poll your audience. And one of those questions should be, on a scale from 1 to 10, how likely are you to share this with a friend? Because that's where 70% of podcast growth comes from, and that's from Jacobs Media, by the way, is people telling other people about your show. And that question came from Jack over at the Darknet Diaries. And that was a guy that spent a long time before he launched his show making sure that his show was right before he delivered it to the public. And when he was on my show and he's getting 300,000 downloads an episode, I was like, how are you doing that? And he's like, I just asked my audience to share. But he knows that works because he did the work to make sure the show was good. And, his show stands out. It's NPR styled storytelling about hackers. So, yeah. Jim, what kind of, let me hit a button here real quick before we should switch gears.
And by the way, thanks, John, for jumping in from with.
Yeah. Before I switch topics, anything else you want to add to,
no, I think we beat that dead horse for a while.
Gabrielle asks, what type of mic holders are you using? I am right now using an OC White called Podcast Pro. I want to say it's $99. I've used the ones from Rode. Those are fine and dandy. I've used ones that are a little less expensive from Samsung. I got one sitting over here that's working good. So the only ones I typically, I don't know, Jim, what are you using?
It's an on stage. I was just looking at it to see what the I've had it for so long.
Oh, you mean you're talking about the clip? I guess that's the question, Gabrielle. Are you talking about the clip or the boom arm?
Yeah, I just use that Rode one. That real common, $99. That for the arm. This is an on stage. The holder is an on stage studio holder.
Because what Jim has, I can recognize it by the little grooves in it. Is the actual clip is a shock mount. It's rubber, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a shock mount, which means in theory, if Jim were to knock on his desk, that should ice. Yeah, he's actually tapping on the arm, and I don't hear it. So. That's that. So yeah, the boom arm, the Rode PS2 is a really popular one. Blue has one that's pretty cool. That's again, most of them are around $99. The Samsung has a few that are maybe not as long, and so they're a little cheaper, and those are fine. The this one from OC White has a built-in cable, which I kind of like until it was about I don't know, a foot too short. So I had to rearrange my desk. So that's kind of cool that they have a built-in cable, but I kind of wouldn't have minded. I know the Rode and the Samsung have, I believe, just the ability to kind of hide the cable and things like that. So, so that's what we're using. I'll have links later in the show description for that. And only on this show do you have people talk about James Cridlin, who's everywhere. Nobody beats Jason Bryant. Greetings from Serbia. So you need a show, Jason, because in your free time, of course, to explain, like you should do a travel show. Because you've been, usually where he's at ends in like extan of some sort. But that's interesting. So yeah, Kyle Bonda says a Heil shock mount is good too. There are all sorts of different things. So.
I don't like the big... I don't like the big shock mounts. I've seen the big round ones that have all the cables that you push this thing into the middle of, and that's not my favorite. Like I don't want a big. I liked this one, and I threw the link to it to Amazon in the chat room if you wanna grab it. But that's not my favorite look.
No,
I don't like that. When I saw these, and they're like $13, and they do exactly what I needed to do. I was like, yeah, if I can get that look without having it, I bought them twice. I bought one for here and one for work. And at $13, and they don't, those elastic rubber bands that
wear out.
They do. Yeah. Eventually they stretch out and then they stop. Then you got to buy new ones.
And
I had a big, for the microphone that shall not be named, the Blue Yeti. I had a shock mount for that, and they've got elastic bands in it. And eventually after a couple of years, one of them broke. I had to replace them. So
yeah, and the fun part of the Blue Yeti is, depending on how you have it, you probably had to buy a shock mount designed for the Blue Yeti.
Yes.
Yeah, which means it's more expensive.
Yeah, it was almost as much as the microphone.
Yeah, you're like, wait, what?
So it was heavy. Like that thing, if someone broke into your house, you could definitely use that thing as a weapon. So it was big. I mean, it was, and you can't see it because this is on video, but it had to be 12 inches. I don't know what that is in centimeters. Sorry, friends in Europe and the rest of the world, but 12 inches and maybe a meter. I don't know. And it was gigantically round to support that mic. And it's just a big, bulky. I ended up selling the whole thing to a gamer.
There you go.
They liked it. They weren't, they were just looking for the sound.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That brought me back, man. I remember when the US was going to switch to the metrics, and we were like, no, we just changed our mind.
Well, I grew up in California in those days. This was the 70s, right? When we were going to make this change. And all the distances were in kilometers, miles, and kilometers. Thank you, Daniel, for saying it was 30 centimeters. All the distances were in kilometers and miles. And I remember thinking, I'll never understand that. It wasn't until I started running in a 10K, 6.2, 5K, 3.2 miles. Like you start putting the math together and you're like, oh, this conversion. Well, then I lived in Europe for 2.5 years and I drove there, and they are not kind to the imperial measuring system. It's only in kilometers. So after maybe about 6 months, I figured it out. So I'm saying, hey, Americans, US based Americans, we could make this change. It's not that hard. We could do it.
There you go. Well, somebody who works both in centimeters and whatever the heck what is ours called? The decimal system?
No, I think isn't it imperial? I thought that's
imperial. Is that it? Okay.
From Britain or whatever.
It's our awesome supporters. And you can be an awesome supporter over at askthepodcastcoach.com/support. So we are talking, we're going to do the train wreck again. Let me turn this off. And we're just going to do it the old school. I'm going to put my microphone in front of the woman in the tube. Open awesome supporters.
From askthepodcastcoach.com/support. Looks like it's Joshua at podcastingexperiments.com.
There you go. Josh at podcastingexperiments.com. Thank you for being an awesome supporter. Why that works on the device and not on my phone, I don't know. Somebody asked about Podpage earlier. Ask the Podcast Coach runs on Podpage. If you're at our website right now, you're soaking in it. Madge. I don't know that. Yeah, she's confused now.
Just to confirm I understand.
Oh, now
we've set her off. Yeah.
The device website?
You have invoked the beast.
Yeah. Alexa, stop. And I'm going to now mute her. I will say, if you need more Jim Collison, and who doesn't, go check him out over at, go check out Home Gadget Geeks at theaverageguy.tv. If you're thinking of starting a podcast, thanks to John, the check's in the mail for allowing me to do a giant commercial today. I did have
setup. I felt like a setup.
Well, later I'm going to ask you a question about Clifton Strengths, just to
there we go.
balance things out. But if you're thinking of starting a podcast, you heard me talk about it earlier. Check me out at schoolofpodcasting.com. Use the coupon code ASK. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, again, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support, which brings up something that I'm now doing. If you're live, you don't hear this, but if you're listening later, because I'm using Libsyn Pro, I am now going to put in little itty bitty, like 15-second nudges. Like, you can save 20% using the coupon code at askthepodcastcoach.com/ask. And what's cool about this, because remember, in the past, it was kind of a hassle to remove certain parts of the show because I'd have to export it twice. I'd have to export it ad-free, and then I have to export it again and give this to the patrons. Now the patrons get the ad-free one. I upload the ad-free one and then insert the ads in post in Libsyn. So I was like, that's less work. It's more work, but it takes like 4 seconds to go here, and here, and I can mark it in my thing. And so that's now another, but we're back to having a bonus of being an awesome supporter. You now get the show with less commercial interruptions. So that's going to be
unless they're planted in there. Unless
they're baked in because John asked one. Yeah. Well, I got this question. It's interesting because some of these I got like before I went to Podcast Movement. So I'm like, I hope this is a good question. I copied and pasted it, and Jim is giving me that look again. That like, hey, I'm really, really thirsty. Doggone it! I see you holding up your cup. So there we go. Can't have a co-host in need of I was
completely out. I was like chewing on the grinds.
So this is from Megan. She says, hello everyone. 2 slightly related questions. I bought the .com and the .org and the .net domains for my podcast website. So far, are there any others I should purchase? And my answer to that, my knee-jerk reaction was like, I don't know if I would even buy the .net these days. I go for the .com, and I'm trying to think the last couple. I don't think I bought the extra
little
ones.
Caveat on that. I think if you have a website that's difficult to spell and people are misspelling it all the time, you might want to buy the misspellings of it. So it's just one of those, if they want to add an S, or if it's I before E except after C, or if it's whatever, if it's unusual and the misspellings are going to get used, that could be that could be something you want to look at to see what. The other thing, Dave, I would think about is if you're into Google Analytics and your domain contains a keyword of some kind, and that's a hot word on Google, you might want to purchase some things that may happen. I can't give you any advice on that because I don't know what it is, but you might want to look into that of owning some of those domains that may show up. You got to do a lot. This is an area where you got to do a lot of work and a lot of research. So that's an area you might want to dig into, or hire an SEO specialist to say what should I do. But generally, the domain extensions, and we just had a guy on Home Gadget Geeks a couple months ago talking about the kind of the extra ones, .info, .podcast. I don't think that's one of those areas where people naturally go, oh yeah, I'm going to try .podcast. It is an area where you might, if you say it in your podcast a lot, I'm at askthepodcastcoach.com, .podcast. You say that consistently, then it sticks. I don't think it on its own gives you any advantage, like having a .net or having a .org or having a .com. That one small exception may be .com, because we've said it so
often. Yeah.
Well,
that and in your browser, if you just type Ask the Podcast Coach and hit Control Enter, it will go to .com. It's a keyboard shortcut. So
yeah.
So
there's a good, Daniel also says numerical and spelled versions, right? I mean, when we think about, I think about my friends over at Two Guys, and they say the number 2, they own the domain Two Guys, but you might want to also own TWO and TOO guys. You might want to own all 3 versions of those on the .com. It really kind of comes down to a budget. Like how much do you want to spend every year to renew these domains?
Yeah. Kim Newlove over at the Pharmacist Voice, I think she has pharmacistvoice.com and pharmacistvoice.com. I know Ray owns Podcaster Studio as well as Podcasters Studio, because you don't know where that S starts when you say Podcaster Studio. Is that Podcasters or Podcast? So he bought both, and then you can point those domains at the other right domain. Gary Leland, when he had Podcast Pickle, he had it PICKLE and EL and PIK. Like there's like 8 million different ways to misspell the word pickle, and he owned them all apparently. So you also have to keep in mind people can't type. So that was the first one. What's your strategy for welding social media as a publicity marketing tool? Where, what, and how often do you post? That's a great question. I'm awful at social media. I am finding out when I do start to follow people, they post a heck of a lot more than I do, which kind of makes sense, because when you think about it, if you put out a tweet or whatever, it does not live long on somebody's timeline. Like when I go to I've been playing more on Twitter probably in the past month, and you can see something and then go to a website and come back and your whole Twitter stream is completely refreshed because it's been, 2 minutes and everything that was right there, it's scrolled down because somebody is, tweet, depending on how many people you follow and things of that nature.
You got to have consistency in those spaces, and each platform defines consistency a little bit different as far as what that means. And I don't think, shouting into the internet is you may gain a few people that way. You actually have to engage with people out there. Like they leave messages, you should respond back. They say things, you should reply. Be nice on there. Like don't start arguments. Don't pick fights. Don't do those things, right? Get out there, be a nice person, respond to people. That's the best way. I still, we still use Twitter quite a bit. And if you ask a guru, they'll be like, Twitter's dead. Well, yeah, it is in big form. I don't think I'd go to it and create an audience there now, but I have a whole bunch of followers over there that I talk to all the time on Twitter, you know, and because we use it as a platform to chat and engage. So just make sure you're engaging on it.
My favorite line about Twitter, and I wish I could remember who said it because I thought it was hilarious. They're like, Twitter, where fun goes to die.
Listen, if you're not curating and you're not being careful and you're not those things, Twitter is it's like YouTube, just to be honest.
It is.
YouTube
yeah.
You have to moderate, right? You have to use some common sense. You have to, I had somebody ask me the other day, I've been trying to build my presence on Twitter. And I was like, why? Like, if you're not already there, man, it's an uphill battle. Now, if you go out there and you start attracting some people and you start having some conversation, why would you walk away? Keep doing it. But you gotta measure your engagement.
Yeah. Coach Dave says about the domain. I think if you're at a stage where you're just now buying your first website, it doesn't matter which domain right now. Invest in show reps and build. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think we're in the past, like .com. If you didn't have a .com, like people would kind of give you the head tilt, kind of like, oh, .net. Oh, sorry to hear that. It's like, it's not quite that bad anymore. I think we've all realized that there's so many websites. He says, I own 40 plus domains. He is an amateur. You're not
going, Dave.
Oh, it's over 100. It's crazy. I do thin the herd on occasion. I'll go in and I'm like, because usually it's an idea I had. I'm like, oh, that would be cool. And then you go back and, I think I still own Castermind. That was one.
Every time you say .com, by the way, I think of .com, the Yahoo.
Oh yeah.
Okay, hold on. Think about the branding on that for a second. Who's thought about Yahoo?
Right.
Like some of you are like, what's Yahoo? Right. Who's thought about that? But in my brain, when you say .com, I think of .com.
Yeah.
Little banjo playing in the background. That's the power of branding, my friends. And
you want to hear something funny? I still use Yahoo as a landing page, but almost because it's so bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
My favorite is they'll be like, man narrowly escapes being eaten by shark. See video, and you'll go to it. And of course there's 8 million ads all over the page.
Oh yeah.
And
that's horrible. And
they'll be like, this person was in insert ocean here, blah, blah, blah. And then there's no video. And the headline was like, it's all clickbaity. And then you'll see people that actually have a Yahoo account to be like, yep, leave it to Yahoo to say, watch the video and then not provide the video. It's just horrible. It really is. And I'm like, I know they kept trying. I know for a while they hired Katie Couric to do some sort of original thing. And I was like, So here's a fun strategy. Coach Dave says, I bought a misspelling of a competitor's domain once and redirected it to my site, and it actually generated traffic. Yeah,
that'll work. If it's popular, right? You just can't, you can't, if that's not getting searched for, it won't work.
The thing I've yet to be able to do is sell a domain. You can give GoDaddy like $20 a year to be part of this auction. And they'll be like, battlingbands.com is worth, $150. And I'm like, great, let's list it for 50. Nothing. Just nothing. I'm like, okay. And it's So
do you own battlingbands.com?
I do own Battling Bands. That was a podcast at one point. And here's the funny story of that. And this is why I tip my hat to anybody who does any kind of competition. But it was, if I remember right, it was either $2 or $5 to enter. CD Baby this is back when people were buying CDs and stuff, and they had an affiliate program. So I would have people say, hey, here's my song in the metal, and here's another band that has a metal song. I'd put the two metal bands up against each other. So I've made a whopping $4. And then if somebody bought what would happen is the band, like the people that came to vote for band A, probably liked band B because it's the same genre. So they would then buy band B. They'd vote for band A, but they would buy band B, and I would earn commission off that. And the big giant prize was, if you win, you get to battle again for free. So, you don't have to pay your whatever $4 entry fee. You just get to battle again. And I went through every voting script that blocked IPs and blah, blah. I'm here to tell you, everyone got hacked. There were people that were clearing their cache and all sorts, just for $2. Like, this is the steps you're going to do to avoid paying $2. It was so dumb, but it was, and then it was fun. I mean, it was interesting, and I got to meet, because what I did then, of course, was I'd get to start these relationships with musicians who I then pointed at the Marketing Musician podcast in my book. So it was a way to kind of like create a podcast where my audience was, and then make friends with them, and then tell them, oh, by the way, for marketing, stuff for music, check out the Marketing Musician podcast. So it was fun, but it was a lot of work. And I just remember I could download the voting, whatever data, and you just see where this one person had voted 38 times from the same IP address. So it became a big headache. And I just was like, yeah, that's enough of that. And then I really wish there was a thing. It was called the PodSafe Music Network, and it was later changed to Music Alley. And I really wish we could bring that back. It was really cool where podcasters could upload music, musicians could upload music and basically say, hey, you're free to play this on your podcast. And then all you had to do was mention something on your podcast to point back to the Music Alley website or whatever. It was really cool. And then, that company was run by what eventually turned into Mevio, and they burned through $36 million and went out of business because free podcasting host doesn't work. Yeah. Shocking that way. But at any rate, Jim, what's coming up on Home Gadget Geeks?
Yeah, so we had Agent Crew from winespies.com. You get the agent, wine spies, right? Kind of motif going on there. Talk a little bit about what's going on at Wine Spies and some technology, some gadgets around wine. So if you're kind of a wine connoisseur, you like wine, or just don't know anything about drinking wine, check it out. I'll be posting it a little bit later today, homegadgetgeeks.com.
Nice. Is there gadgets to get the cork out of the bottle kind of stuff? Or
yeah, you'd be surprised at the different styles of things there are just to get the cork out. And then of course there's aerators and all kinds of things. And we talk about different services they have. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It was a fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'm more bourbon than I am wine, but I enjoyed the conversation.
Nice. On the School of Podcasting, I've been taking notes recently, and this is not, again, about the PM22 thing, just for the record, but I'm going to be sharing about some mistakes that I've made and looking back, how I made them, where I made them, whatever. I'll give you a preview. One is I have an episode right now as I speak that says, because of my podcast, I went to Brazil. And you're like, wow, that's really cool. There's only one problem. My guest didn't go to Brazil. I thought she said Brazil, but she didn't. And so it was like, really? I could have sworn, nope, I went to this. I'm like, okay. She's like, and I've been to these other countries. And I was like, you didn't go to Brazil? Nope, never been to Brazil. And I was like, okay, well, I'll have to fix that. So there are a few things that I've done. One thing I do want to test here before we get out the door, Jim, I'm going to hit my mute button. I need to know if I'm muted when.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Cause I was in something else and they said, no, I can still hear you. And I was like, that's interesting. But, so that'll be out on Monday on, the School of Podcasting. And, thanks to everyone in the chat room and on the Wisdom app. We'll be back next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.